Just a little bit about our featured speaker, because we're on a tight schedule here, and I know everybody wants to get on at some point. Make sure you're online, please, for the panel discussion, because they'll be voting in. I just want to read a little bit about Ben Shapiro, because I can't memorize all of his accolades. Born in 1984, entered UCLA at the age of 16, graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa in June 2004 with a BA in political science. Political science. That's an oxymoron. Graduated Harvard Law School cum laude June 2007. At the age of 17, he became the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in the U.S. He's worked for ABC News, done articles in Chicago Sun-Times, subject of Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Associated Press, Christian Science Monitor, Rush Limbaugh Show. It goes on and on. Author of many books, Brainwash, the story of how your children are being indoctrinated at college into a certain way of thinking, and it goes on and on. O'Reilly Factor, just about everybody that we would normally watch on TV. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ben Shapiro.
So I'm always hesitant to talk about trade and commerce and economics with people who are actually engaged in the business of doing it, as opposed to people who just comment on it for a living. But the fact is that we're living in obviously very turbulent times in terms of American trade and commerce, in terms of where the American economy currently stands. Obviously, we saw what happened in the stock market over the last couple of weeks, which reveals some underlying fundamentals about the state of not only the United States economy, but the world economy, which is increasingly weak. The Chinese economy, the biggest problem with the Chinese economy is not really the Chinese economy. The biggest problem with the Chinese economy is that the United States seems to be following the same sorts of economic policies that the Chinese have followed for the last several years. We've bought into the notion that they are an explosive growth country as opposed to covering up what is a relatively weak economy with heavy government policy, heavy spending, and heavy debt. The American export market is looking particularly weak because of what China is doing in devaluing its dollar, obviously. They've made their own exports significantly cheaper for people in the United States to buy, and they've destroyed whatever savings their own folks have. So the Chinese market for American goods has dropped significantly. President Obama has been inflating the currency, but it's not seeming to do much simply because our rate of inflation is so much lower than everybody else's. Everybody else's economy is imploding. The inherent strength of the United States economy has not, President Obama, despite his best efforts, has not been able to completely destroy the inherent strength of the United States economy. And so we continue to ride higher than other countries, comparatively speaking. Because the Chinese have been trying to stave off their own inflation problem to compete with the US dollar as reserve currency, they've been raising their debt and it hasn't worked. They subsidized bad businesses and so that all came to a crashing halt. Several months ago, all the whiz kids on Wall Street, the fact that they didn't see the stock market crash coming was somewhat shocking. Given the fact that in June and July, the Chinese stock market corrected by 32%. And so everybody who was watching the stock market in the United States said, oh, well, everything will be fine. The Chinese are in control. Well, they weren't in control enough that they were arresting people for short selling. When you're arresting people for legally short selling and taking stockbrokers and throwing them in jail like China is doing, it's a pretty good indicator that maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with your economy. The biggest problem right now politically is that politicians on both the left and the right are responding by becoming more protectionist, which may be good for businesses in the short run that need the subsidies and need the protection from foreign competition. In the long run, for the United States economy, tariffs rarely work. It's okay to have tariffs in a state where there's not a lot of international trade, but eventually what ends up happening is that when those tariffs are brought down, if you've subsidized your economy to a very large extent, then the businesses become non-competitive, which is exactly what happened with the American auto industry in the 1950s and 60s. Turns out that when the rest of the world has been completely destroyed by war, it makes a really good export market for us because nobody else is producing anything. But the problem is that when you put tariffs on everybody else's goods, you make all of your own businesses non-competitive, which is why we went from leading the world in producing cars in the 1950s to being completely non-competitive by the 1980s to having the government bail out all the major car industries by the 2000s. So it's tempting to kind of fall into the the anti-trade mentality that's now being promoted on both the right and the left, actually, because there's a big debate going on inside the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party. This is one that actually crosses partisan lines about what should the nature of trade be in the United States. You actually saw Republicans join with President Obama in pushing the Trans-Pacific Partnership over Democratic opposition, specifically because they were pro-trade, even though they really don't trust President Obama, and Democrats who want to be protectionist with some of their key constituencies and industries, namely union-backed industries. They want those folks to be able to be protected, and so they were bucking President Obama's trend. Now, the truth is that we shouldn't really fear Chinese export markets taking American jobs. Over the past 15 years or so, according to Robert Samuelson in the Washington Post, Chinese export markets have taken about 2 million American jobs, which sounds like a lot of jobs, except for the fact that the United States economy supports about 150 million jobs right now, so that really is not a huge percentage in terms of kind of the broader market. But what is going to hurt Americans in terms of their pocketbook is raising the prices on everything that they could possibly buy. Well, when you look at where we are in terms of the United States population and where they see this stuff, the problem is that you hear candidates on both sides, and particularly on the Republican side, and it's very frustrating to me as a conservative. It's very frustrating when you hear candidates say that if Republicans just talk about economics more, then they will win elections. This seemed to be the idea behind Mitt Romney's candidacy, that if Mitt Romney just avoided talk about all other issues and talked economics, that's obviously the number one issue that people care about is economics in every poll. They always say the thing that they care about most is the state of the economy. The problem is that that's an incredibly vague question, because it turns out that socialists care about the state of the economy and capitalists care about the state of the economy. So just because you say that you care about the state of the economy, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're actually going to vote in favor of policies that make the economy better, or does it mean that you're going to vote in favor of what they call fairer policies, which is really redistributionism? And we've been very lucky in the United States, and people of my generation particularly, because we've grown up in the most powerful country in the history of the world, where you could basically do what you wanted to do fiscally, where it was guaranteed that you were going to have a microwave and a car, and your standard of living was going to be better than the standard of living of rich people back in the 1940s. Capitalism had basically guaranteed that we were going to grow up in prosperity, and we were fooled into believing that this would naturally continue. And you hear politicians say this all the time. We're the greatest country in the world. We'll always be the greatest country in the world. Well, maybe not. Sort of depends on what we do. It took capitalism half a century to come back from the Great Depression. It's taken socialism a grand total of 15 to 20 years to come back from the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union. And that's because people don't understand what government involvement in the economy does. And what we're watching politically speaking, and again, it's on both sides of the aisle, but on the left particularly, it's very frightening to see how fast the left in America has moved away from the era of big government is over to Bernie Sanders is leading in Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, Bernie Sanders is an open socialist, right? He calls himself a democratic socialist, which means he's not for the government ownership of the means of production. Depends on what the means of production are. But he has come out in favor of higher and higher government regulations of business. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio, who is an actual socialist, has decided that his goal, I mean, this is a direct quote, was to take dead aim at the tail of the two cities, which is the gap between rich and poor, which means taking money from people who earn and giving it to people who don't earn. In Seattle, they actually have an elected city councilwoman named Shana Sawant, who's an open socialist, and when I say open socialist, I mean a Marxist, who's actually suggested that the government take over Boeing factories and, in her words, use the Boeing factories not to build warplanes, but to build mass transportation buses. I wasn't aware that Boeing was in the warplane business, but she thinks they are, and so the government should seize Boeing and use it for its own purposes. She says, I wear the badge of socialist with honor. And just a few months ago, there's a columnist for Rolling Stone magazine named Jesse Meyerson. He put out a column telling millennials they ought to fight for government guaranteed employment, a universal basic income, collectivization of private property, nationalization of private assets, and public banks. And we are seeing that this is starting to infuse more and more of our mainstream politics. It's not just the fringe anymore. When you say when you see that Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid has said that there's no greater challenge than income disparity, when you have President Obama campaigning day in and day out, income inequality, first of all, anybody of good heart should recognize that income inequality is the stupidest issue to worry about in the world. I have never worried about the guy living next door to me. Really. I mean, I don't care how big his house is. And to be truthful, I would rather be the guy living next door to Bill Gates than the guy living next to the person on Skid Row, where everybody is completely equal in Los Angeles. Everybody on Skid Row in Los Angeles is living in cardboard boxes and swapping and swapping old tea bags, but they're perfectly equal, you'd obviously rather be the guy living next to Bill Gates and be completely unequal with Bill Gates but still be a multimillionaire. Income inequality doesn't matter. What matters is how much money you are making. But the country is moving in another direction, and that includes Donald Trump, by the way, who has now stated in true Obama fashion that he believes that hedge fund managers should be punished because they earn too much money. You remember back in 2008, President Obama, then Senator Obama, was asked during a debate, if you raise the capital gains tax and receipts to the government go down, if you raise the capital gains tax and it takes in less tax dollars, would you still be in favor of raising the capital gains tax? And then Senator Obama said yes, for purposes of fairness. In other words, the effect of the tax is of no consequence to him. It's the underlying drive for fairness that truly matters. Bernie Sanders, obviously, is a good indicator of just how ignorant people are about economics. When you're driving 30,000 people to a stadium in Los Angeles to hear a 73-year-old bat loony socialist talk, that's a pretty good indicator that people don't understand basic principles of economics. And they've been allowed not to understand basic principles of economics because when you don't live under tyranny, when you've grown up with freedom guaranteed to you, then it's a lot of fun to play around with these ideas. Polls show that young people particularly, they don't even know what socialism is. There's a poll recently from Gallup which showed young people aged 18 to 29 actually said that they favored socialism. 43% said they liked socialism. They didn't know what socialism was when they were asked. They thought that there should be less government involvement in the economy, same poll. But 33% of people aged 30 to 49 said that they liked socialism. 16% of millennials, when you ask them, could actually define socialism as government ownership of the means of production. But support for socialism in college is actually a plurality position. 49% of college students say they support socialism. 48% of college students say they support capitalism. Because of course, socialism is kind and gentle. It means that you care about your fellow man, whereas capitalism is evil and nasty. So what exactly happened to make this turn? Well, the first thing that happened is that people stopped defending capitalism as a moral system. It sort of became background noise. Capitalism was Gordon Gekko, greed is good. We allowed the left, we on the right allowed the left to take over the narrative about what capitalism was. It turned into trickle-down economics, which, by the way, is not a phrase that any Republican has ever used, any conservative has ever used. It was a phrase that was coined by folks on the left to describe how they thought that the economic system worked from the perspective of the right. But that's not a right-wing position, the idea of trickle-down capitalism, as though there's somebody who's sitting up top of a pyramid of people and urinating on them, and if they're lucky, then eventually they receive the liquid on the other end. That's not how capitalism works, obviously, and anybody who's ever employed people knows that's not how capitalism works. It's not a trickle-down effect. It's a working together effect. If I work with you, I'm going to pay you. But there's this mentality that is set in among Americans that employers at a certain point become bad and evil. When you're an employee, then you're good, and when you're an employer, then you become bad at a certain point. Like, you were a good person up until the point you hired somebody. At that point, you started to sock away money in your bank vault like Scrooge McDuck, and every night you would go and you'd swim in the coins. And then you'd go to work, and then you'd see how you could stiff the guy on the low end of the totem pole. But, of course, nobody who's ever employed people or dealt with a boss or taken a paycheck has ever experienced this. We've all had bosses who are jerks, of course, but that's not the same thing as suggesting that the boss is able to completely operate in a world free of competition. And that seems to be the implication of the folks on the left. But folks folks who are fans of capitalism have not been able to defend this. And back in 1998, it looked like capitalism was going to win out. We'd had Bill Clinton, of course, say that the era of big government was over. Now it's pretty clear that the era of small government is over when you have folks on the right, like John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, declaring that God mandates that we expand Medicaid in Ohio by taking Obamacare dollars. And he's a Republican candidate for president of the United States. So what happened? Well, again, the failure to defend capitalism as a moral system. Back in 1998, there was a book called The Commanding Heights that came out. It was by Daniel Yergin and Joseph Stanislaw. A very good book, and talking about the evolution of economics over the course of the 20th century around the world, and talking about how by the end of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, dawn of socialism, by the end of the 20th century, socialism was over. USSR had collapsed. Socialism was in remission around the globe. It seemed like we were finally moving into an era of open competition and free trade. And Bill Clinton had signed NAFTA into law. I mean, there were principles of capitalism and open markets that seemed to win out. But the authors of The Commanding Heights noted that this would not be necessarily a permanent state of affairs. And why? Because they said, if you look back at the 1930s, in the Spanish Civil War, and you looked at the people who were dying on behalf of the communists, it was communists versus fascists in the 1930s Spanish Civil War. The legend went that the communists who were dying against the Spanish fascists, when they were dying with the word Stalin on their lips, and these authors pointed out, nobody dies with the words free markets on their lips. And because people didn't make the moral case for capitalism, they basically doomed capitalism to failure. Because people of my generation think capitalism is evil. People of my generation think that capitalism is cruel. And when we go on defensive with regard to free markets and business and capitalism, the buzzwords don't work anymore. When you hear Republicans talk about entrepreneurship, or when you hear people, even in the moderate left, talk about the value of business, people immediately go to big business in a heartbeat, and they think Occupy Wall Street, and they think of fat cats on Wall Street who are trying to gyp people, and they think of business owners who are in nice places like this, who are overlooking golf courses. And those are the people who are not paying their salaries. Those are the people who should be giving up the golf course so that these people can get an extra car. And that sort of mentality has set in a major way. Now, the truth is that there is no less moral system than socialism. In terms of the actual morality of these systems, there is no less moral system than socialism. Socialism is deeply immoral. Socialism is evil, actually. The basic principle, which is that I am breathing, therefore you owe me crap, is a deeply evil principle. Right? Capitalism is actually forced altruism. Free markets are forced altruism. Right? If I don't do something for you, I will starve. If I don't do something for you, I won't be able to pay my bills. Free exchange of services means that I have to do something for you. Right? You are going to get something out of me, and I'm going to get something out of you, and we're both better off than we were before. Socialism is the idea that if I'm sitting here, you owe me something simply by virtue of me sitting. I don't owe anything to you. I don't owe you work. I don't owe you. I don't owe you my efforts. I don't owe you my intellect. I don't owe you anything. You owe me things just because I'm here. Because brotherhood of man, now pay off. And the fact that people won't explain this even to their own children, they don't feel the need to explain this, is because we take certain things for granted in this country. We take for granted that voluntary exchange is the way that things are done. We take for granted the rule of law. We take for granted that the government will actually enforce property rights. Well, these are things that we're not going to be able to take for granted for very much longer. The idea of rule of law. It's obvious that rule of law is going by the wayside. When you have a government that is overstepping every boundary that it can find, when you have a government that is not even hemmed in by a judiciary, because the judiciary has decided that it acts with will instead of with its own ability to discern the law, when you have legislatures that abdicate in favor of judiciaries that take over for them, you end up with a situation where nobody takes responsibility for enforcing the law. Now, up in Washington State recently, actually had the state legislature of Washington State couldn't come to an agreement about raising taxes and raising spending on education, so the Supreme Court actually fined the legislature and and the Supreme Court said that they have to spend a given number of dollars on education or the judiciary would fine them. There are states in the Midwest where courts have actually fined legislature, they've actually forced the legislature to raise taxes. Courts have done this because the legislature had made some sort of vague commitment, and now the court was going to enforce that vague commitment in the form of actual legislation created by the courts. On the federal level, of course, you have the President of the United States who believes he can do whatever the hell he wants, and he can. No one's going to stop him. You know, he's shown over and over is that he's fully willing to go beyond the boundaries of his office. He's fully willing to expand presidential power in unprecedented ways. And whether you're talking about immigration or whether you're talking about the National Labor Relations Board, where he stacked the National Labor Relations Board with his own people and then proceeded to use it as a club to wield against industries he didn't like. Whether you're talking about the EPA, which is now cracking down on carbon emissions, as though that is something they've been enabled to do by federal law, which they have not. Or whether you're talking about the IRS, which the President of the United States conveniently forgot to tell you're not supposed to target people of a certain political bent. When these things go away, when rule of law goes away, then what do? And the answer is we have to re-educate an entire generation of people. And that re-education is going to have to take place at the grassroots level, because don't count on one election fixing everything. If Mitt Romney had won in 2012, things would be different, but they wouldn't be that different. Because the fact is that when you have an entrenched bureaucracy that's been building over the course of 100 years, when you have millions of people working for that entrenched bureaucracy, when you have those people unable to be fired, unelected people, when you have bureaucrats at the state and local level who are going to crack down on your business simply so that they can get electioneering dollars from the person who is benefited by that particular regulation, this is going to take a real generational shift in America, which means affirmative effort in terms of how we talk to our kids. Because let's just look at the electoral landscape for a second. Because if you look at the 2016 electoral landscape, the electoral landscape on the local level is pretty red, and then when you move up to the national level, it's almost completely blue. The chances that Hillary Clinton is the President of the United States in January 2017, I've been giving people 4-to-1 odds that Hillary Clinton is President of the United States in January of 2017, despite the email scandals, despite the corruption, despite all of it. And that's because if you look at the electoral map, the fact is that Mitt Romney could have won Florida, Virginia, and Ohio and still lost the election. He could have won all 3 of those and still lost the 2012 election using the electoral map. The fact is that just using the last 4 elections, states that went blue in all of the last 4 elections versus states that went red in the last 4 elections, 225 electoral votes are guaranteed to Democrats before they start the car. You only need 270 to win. And that's counting the states that went blue in 4 elections. If you're talking about states that actually went blue in 3 of the last 4 elections, meaning 1 Bush and 2 Obama, then you're talking Democrats having 246 electoral votes out of 270 before they even start. So Democrats basically need to win Florida. That's essentially it. Republicans have to win Florida, Virginia, Ohio, and at least 1 other state that has a significant number of electoral votes. If Republicans lose Florida, they have to sweep every single non-Democratic leaning swing state. All of them. So that's a significant obstacle for Republicans. So let's get into the electoral math of this, because I think that that's kind of what people are interested in more than my economic jargon or economic garbage. But here, let's talk about what the election breaks down like, because there are a bunch of myths that have to do with the election in terms of how the election is going to be decided. So the first myth that we're hearing over and over and over again is that the election is going to be decided based on the Hispanic vote. This is not true. The election is not going to be decided based on the Hispanic vote. The fact is that Mitt Romney, this is always a great kind of quiz question. What percentage of the Hispanic vote would Mitt Romney have had to win in 2012 in order to win the national election? Any guesses? The answer is he would have had to win 71% of the Hispanic vote in order to win the election in 2012. The idea that if he had won, George W. Bush's percentage of the Hispanic vote, that he would have won the election, it's not true. He would have had to win 71% of the Hispanic vote in order to win, because the swing states have very few Hispanics in them. Right? There are a few that have heavy Hispanic populations. Florida's 22.8% Hispanic, but that's heavily Cuban. New Mexico is heavily Hispanic, it's 46.7% Hispanic. Colorado is about 20% Hispanic, but if you look at Ohio or Virginia, Ohio is 3.4% Hispanic, Virginia is 8% Hispanic. So the idea that Republicans have to reach out to the Hispanic vote in order to win is simply not true. And it's also a mistake for Republicans to look at the Hispanic vote as though this is going to be their big breakthrough. It's not going to happen. The reality is that the Hispanic population, far from being an inherently conservative population, at least in the first and second generations, is actually a pretty inherently leftist population. 81% of Hispanics, according to a Pew Hispanic poll, favor a bigger government with more services. That's as compared to 41% of Americans overall who actually believe in a bigger government with more services. 12% of Hispanic immigrants want smaller government with less services. Exit polls in 2012 showed 61% of Hispanics wanted Obamacare expanded or left as is. 59% of Hispanics, people say that the Hispanic population of the United States is socially conservative. That is not true. In 2012, 59% of Hispanics said they wanted gay marriage legalized, and 66% said that abortion should be legal in most or all cases. So that's not even a critique of the positions, that's just making the point that the Republican platform is not a matter of Hispanics buy in as soon as you take immigration off the table. So don't be fooled by that one. The reality is, and this is uncomfortable to say, but the reality is that if Republicans want to win, they need to get out the white vote. It is that simple. There were 4 million white voters who did not show up in the last election cycle. Mitt Romney saw a significant voter drop-off in the last election cycle. And most of those people were blue-collar. And this is where the economics comes back in, because the Republican Party, in order to drive blue-collar workers out to the polls, is beginning to embrace protectionism again. They're starting to embrace minimum wage again. They're starting to embrace a sort of old-school William McKinley policy on economics that is probably not in keeping with today's world, but is probably their best shot to win blue-collar voters over, because there's a gap in the Republican Party between sort of the Donald Trump Republicans and the Rick Santorum Republicans on the one hand, and the Mitt Romney Republicans on the other. The Mitt Romney Republicans are people who went to MIT and understand that free trade over the long haul is good for the economy, and the Donald Trump Republicans are people who look at people who lost jobs in the Rust Belt and they say, okay, I'm not going to ask you to continue to lose more jobs in the Rust Belt in order so that people can have lower prices at various stores that they shop. The reality is that Mitt Romney, if he had won 3% more of the white vote, he would have won the election. He would have had to win something like 50% more of the Hispanic vote in order to win the election. So these elections are now coming down to voter turnout. Republicans also are going to have to target older voters. So the myth that Republicans need to target younger voters, that Barack Obama's coalition was young voters and Hispanic and minority, and Republicans have to target that, that's not true. Basically, the general electoral argument in the country right now is that there are no moderate voters. Moderate voters are done. Moderate voters do not decide elections. Mitt Romney won moderate voters and he lost the election. He actually won moderate voters by a pretty large margin. He won moderate voters, people who were self-identified independents, he won them by 6 to 7%, and he still lost the election by 5 million votes. Voter turnout is where it's at. Exciting voters is where it's at. Getting people in your base to show up is where it's at. And by the way, suppressing votes on the other side, which is what Democrats successfully did in 2012. It wasn't that Obama's voter turnout went up. It didn't. His voter turnout was significantly down. Obama in 2012 actually got 5 million less votes than he got in 2008. He won by 5 million votes over Romney because Romney raised his vote over John McCain by about 1 million votes, which is nothing. And so in a historic blowout like 2008, that translates into a mild blowout for Barack Obama in 2012. And that's because people have been taught that Mitt Romney, and again, this goes back to perceptions of capitalism, perceptions of how executives operate. The idea is that Mitt Romney was a Wall Street fat cat. If you look at the exit polls in 2012, voters agreed that Mitt Romney was a stronger leader. They agreed that Mitt Romney knew better how to run the country. They agreed with Mitt Romney on most of his policies. There's one area where they didn't agree with Mitt Romney, and this is what destroyed Mitt Romney's candidacy. And that was 81% to 18%, Mitt Romney does not care about people like me. Right? When asked who cares more about people like you, 81% of Americans, including majority of Republicans, said Obama cares more about people like me. And that again is because of the fundamental disconnect when it comes to a capitalist system in which many bosses are not on the factory floors with their workers, and as we move away, unfortunately in many ways, from manufacturing and toward service-oriented economies and hedge funds controlling the funding of particular businesses, that distance is creating a significant gap in the minds of people as to how their bosses operate. Their bosses are the people who wear $3,000 suits. Their bosses are not the people who are hanging out on the factory floor. This is why in 2008, Mike Huckabee basically destroyed Mitt Romney's candidacy with one line. Mitt Romney was doing relatively well in the polls, and Huckabee said that Mitt Romney looks like the guy who fires you, I look like the guy who stands next to you on the factory floor. And that pretty much ended Romney, and that was something he never got over. And this is why this sort of desperation, there's some donors who are saying Romney should come back now in the 2016 election. Did an article about that yesterday, that we need more Romney. Romney was so right on in 2012, and we have to have our revenge in 2016. We're just going to keep running him like William Jennings Bryan. He's going to be 90 years old, and we're just going to continue running Mitt Romney because we were so right in 2012, and everything he said was so correct. And he has not fixed the fundamental problem with Mitt Romney, which is that he's Mitt Romney. And in order to conquer that, Republicans are going to have to either find a new face or find a new policy. I am urging that Republicans find a new face with regard to representing free markets and capitalism. And what that requires in terms of the moral discussion is not just that capitalism is good, because everybody says capitalism is good. Even Democrats will say capitalism is good while arguing for more regulations on business. What Republicans need to do is a political tactic that is best known as sumo wrestling. There's a book called Compelling People by Matthew Kohut and John Neffinger, who are both teach at Harvard Business School. And in that, they describe a political maneuver that is extraordinarily effective and useful. And what that political maneuver is called sumo wrestling. What you do is you put yourself in the circle. Imagine you're wrestling with somebody. So the first thing that you do is you get in the circle with that person, and the second thing you do is you throw them out of the circle. And this is what Republicans, this is what conservatives, this is what anybody politically, regardless of where you stand, if you want to be successful in politics, actually if you want to be successful with people generally, you have to put yourself in the circle with them and then throw the other guy out. And so what Republicans have spent an awful lot of time doing is trying to buy their way into the circle by explaining how kind and generous and wonderful they are. And meanwhile, Democrats have spent all their time throwing Republicans out of the circle. So in 2012, Mitt Romney campaigned on the idea that he was kind and generous, he was a very good, solid man. And Barack Obama campaigned on the idea that he too was a good, solid man, but Mitt Romney was the guy who strapped dogs to the top of his cars, fired people specifically so their wives would later die of cancer, shipped all of his money overseas because he wanted to damage the country, and had a terrible singing voice for America the Beautiful. Right? This is basically the pitch. And so if conservatives want to win, if business people want to win, they're going to have to throw anti-business people outside the circle. So that means no more tolerance for anti-business rhetoric as just another perspective on the issues. It means no more tolerance for anti-entrepreneurship rhetoric. It's just a different take. Just, we can agree to disagree. Because agreeing to disagree doesn't win you any arguments. What actually does win arguments is making clear to your own employees, and I think this is true for I say this whenever I speak to business people. Business people have so much more control over the direction of the politics in this country than anybody thinks they do, specifically because they hire an enormous number of people. See, what folks on the left have discovered is that the easiest way to take over politics is to work institutionally. Don't convince people individually, convince people institutionally. Take over Hollywood and then use the mechanism of Hollywood to convince millions of people at the same time of your principles. Right? Take over the institutions of the universities and then use the classrooms to indoctrinate hundreds of people in a classroom at the same time. Conservatives typically, maybe with the mild exception of churches, which have gone apolitical also to avoid IRS scrutiny, conservatives tend to talk to people one-on-one a lot more than folks on the left do, because when you have the mainstream media, when you have NBC and CBS and ABC all preaching the same message on point, it's pretty easy to get your message across to millions of people. And when those people are continuously preaching that their institutions are great and your institutions suck, it makes it difficult. The truth is, business people don't like to think of themselves, because they are capitalists, as institutions. Right? You have a voluntary mechanism of exchange with every one of your employees. These are not people who are subject to your whims. These are people with whom you work. These are people you want to keep employed. These are people who you care for, and you care for their families. But the truth is that employers have an enormous amount of leverage over their employees when it comes to politics. And the message that people will lose their jobs if certain political things happen in the country is something that ought to be known. Not because it's mean, but because it's true. And reality doesn't care about people's feelings. Facts don't care about people's feelings. If you truly oppose a policy that's backed by a particular candidate and you feel that that is going to cost jobs, your employees have a right to know that it's going to cost jobs, and they should know that it's malicious intent that is going to cost the loss of jobs. And it is malicious. The idea that everybody is well-intentioned is nonsense. People know that jobs are going to be lost. They just don't care. The folks who are proclaiming that they want to increase the costs on businesses, it's not like they're stupid. It's not like they actually think that the Scrooge McDuck Bank exists back of your house, that the vault exists back of your house. They just don't care. They understand that to win votes and to win hearts and minds, they have to castigate you as the person with the Scrooge McDuck Bank out back of your house. And so it's important that folks on the other side be castigated for telling those lies. In other words, speak the language of morality. Because when it comes down to it, that's the only language that people understand. I come from LA. Both my parents work in Hollywood, and I have a lot of friends who work in Hollywood. In fact, my best friend runs the underground conservative Hollywood group, Friends of Abe, which is not so underground now that it was profiled by the IRS and put on the front page of the New York Times. But my friend, who is the head of Friends of Abe, his executive director, his name is Jeremy Boring, and unfortunate name, but Jeremy's a good guy. And Jeremy is fond of explaining to people how narrative works when it comes to both business and politics. And what he says, he likes to use the analogy of Star Wars. So I assume everybody in the room has seen Star Wars. If not, then you've been under a rock for the last 70 years. In Star Wars, the entire basis of the Star Wars story is good and evil, right? Any good story is about good and evil. Any good story is about right and wrong. Any good story is about good and bad. The fact is that Luke Skywalker is an incredibly whiny, nondescript character, but you know he's the hero. The reason that you know he's the hero is not because he wants to go down to the power station for some converters. The reason that he's the hero is because the movie doesn't open with Luke Skywalker. The movie opens with a giant ship chasing a tiny little ship, and the giant ship flies over the camera for a solid 35 seconds. And then, after that tiny ship is captured, the door is blown open, and a 7-foot-tall guy in a death mask walks in and proceeds to strangle somebody to death by picking him up off the ground while asking him a question he clearly doesn't know the answer to. And you figure, okay, this is probably the bad guy. And the next cut is to Luke Skywalker. Oh, well, that's probably the good guy. Because people, if somebody had said that Darth Vader is really a well-intentioned fellow, a good fellow who's just very bad at administration, his administration of the Galactic Empire has just been less than stellar, and that Death Star really could be used for good if it were in the right hands. It's just that it's in the wrong hands. So if we just shifted that over to Mitt Romney, then things would be all better. Or if we just had a better administrator, if we replaced Darth Vader with Grand Admiral Tarkin, then things would be significantly better. The movie doesn't work. The narrative doesn't work. And the truth is that until people start speaking in terms of narrative, start speaking in terms of morality with regard to issues that affect us but seem too vague for the everyday, then the forces of anti-business are going to win in the country, because they are telling a moral narrative every day. And the moral narrative is that everybody in this room sucks. That's the moral narrative. The moral narrative is that everybody in this room is a terrible person. And you're a terrible person specifically because you earn and because you have money. The mere fact that you have money is the reason that you are a bad person. You would be a better person if you didn't have money. And it wouldn't matter how that money was lost. It wouldn't matter if you lost that in a stock market crash or whether you just blew it on hookers and booze. It would not matter. If you were poor, you would be a better person. The virtue of poverty is something that's being taught every day in our schools and in our universities, and it's being taught by our politicians, and it's been ingrained so much so in our politics that even Republican candidates feel the need to tell silly stories about how they were poor growing up, as though that confers some sort of virtue. I think one of the charms of Donald Trump is that he doesn't do this routine. Right? Everything is gold-plated, including his hair. And it's always been like that. And he has the most magnificent hotels. And it's sort of charming to hear a politician who's not doing the I grew up in a log cabin story. It didn't ring true when Mitt Romney was talking about how he and Ann used to eat off an ironing board. You know, the fact is that we need to get away from the idea that poverty is virtue and wealth is sin. And the only way to get away from that is to make clear bad decisions are bad and good decisions are virtuous. And when it comes to the economy, free exchange is virtuous, and forced exchange of any sort, whether you're talking minimum wage or whether you're talking additional work regulations, whether you're talking government-sponsored unions or whether you're talking the EPA, forced exchange is an evil. It's not a bad, it's an evil. It's something that is morally wrong. And you're in a position to talk to people about that because you're the people who are actually keeping people employed and doing good things for people every day. And we can extend that message, by the way, to communities that haven't typically heard that message. The truth is that the reason capitalism sustained so long in the United States was because so many people were dependent on capitalism. As government began to grow, people became dependent on government, and you are always going to love that which you are dependent on. Right? You love mom when you're a baby because you're dependent on mom. You love government if you're an adult in the United States because you're dependent on government. So people in this country are either going to be dependent on business or they're going to be dependent on government. It's going to be one or the other. And so it's incumbent on us, anybody who's hiring, to go into areas where people have been typically dependent on government and teach them that the real dependency ought to be on their own skill set and their own efficiency, and that we can work with them to make their lives better. I think if we do that, then I think that there is hope for the free market in this country. If we don't, I think we're going to continue to slide down this path that we've been on for far too long. But it will take an effort, and it will take an affirmative effort. It's not going to happen naturally. I do think that we will remain the best country that ever was, and hopefully the best country that ever will be. But only if we begin to recognize that this is in fact a moral battle and not just an economic one. Thanks so much. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, Ben, based on your comments about Florida and the Hispanic vote, do you see that Jeb would be the right guy for the Republicans to run? Or?
I think Jeb would be disastrous for the Republicans to run. I think that there are a lot of Republicans who would stay home if Jeb were to be the candidate. And not just because of the immigration issue, but because people are so sick of the Bushes. They don't like the Bushes. They're not interested in the Bushes. It's why you're seeing, I mean, right now it's not just Trump, right? I mean, the top four candidates in the Republican side are Trump, Carson, Cruz, Fiorina by the latest polls. Fiorina's jumped. And so what you've seen is, so three of those four people are not even politicians, and the other one is a guy who spent his entire career bashing the Republican Party. The reason that Trump is succeeding right now is not because Trump is a great politician or anything. It's for a couple of reasons. One is that Republicans truly hate the Republican Party at this point. They've been promised so many times that if they just elect more Republicans, that the Republicans will stop illegal immigration and they'll make the economy better. They'll stop Obama from pushing things like the Iran deal, and they'll stop Obamacare. And then the Republicans get in and say, oh, sorry, turns out there's nothing we can do. We'll need some more of your money. We'll need some more of your votes. And so people are saying, this is nonsense. Enough already. And so Trump is such an FU to the establishment. And so there's so many people who love that. And I have to admit, there's an anarchist part of me that sort of loves it too. Like, I'm really enjoying it. And I don't know how many of you have seen The Dark Knight, but I'm starting to feel like the Joker. I want to burn piles of cash, and I don't know why I have to chase that car. I don't know what I'm going to do, and I catch the car, but I have to chase it. And that's sort of how Trump's candidacy feels a little bit. In terms of his personality, people are enjoying Trump because he's a hammer in search of a nail. And so that means that sometimes he's going to hit a puppy, but sometimes he's really going to hit a nail really hard, and it's going to be awesome. So sometimes he's going to, sometimes he's going to hit Megyn Kelly, and people are going to go, what was that? And then sometimes he's going to hit Jorge Ramos, and everybody's going to go, oh, he so deserved that. And so Trump is succeeding on that score. He also has, in terms of candidacy, what most candidates need, which is a sword and a shield. The sword being that he speaks very bluntly. Now, people think that Donald Trump is dishonest. He's actually the most honest guy in the race, but he's honestly dishonest, right? He's like Bill Clinton. Trump is not shifting his positions because he's making calculated decisions. He actually thinks it right now. In 45 seconds, he may think something completely different, but right now, he thinks what he's thinking. And so you know that he's thinking what he's thinking because the guy has no filter whatsoever. He has no capacity to think 3 steps ahead. He's living right now. I mean, he's living the dream. So that's his sword, and then his shield is that he's a celebrity. So because he's a celebrity, he gets away with crap that nobody else would get away with. Because the reality is that we all have friends who say things that are super impolitic and crazy, and somebody will say, "Oh, you know, Joe, he just told this joke, and oh man, this is such a terrible joke." And you go, "Oh well, that's just Joe." Right now, if somebody had told you that Bob, who you've never met, told the same joke, oh God, what a terrible person. Well, that's what celebrity does. Celebrity makes you feel like you know the person. It's like, oh, that's just Trump being Trump. Okay, so he made a joke about Megyn Kelly's period. Whatever, it's Trump. Right? And so he's able to get away with things. But you know, as far as the Bush question, I think the Bush is going to be out of the race within the next 3 months. I don't think the Bush even makes it to Iowa. I think that he's in serious trouble. I think the donors don't like him. I think that if I had to predict the race right now, I think that the race comes down to a final 3. And the final 3 does include Trump. I don't think Trump is going to fade away. I think the final 3 includes Trump. I think it includes, unless Ben Carson steals his thunder, I think it includes Trump. I think it includes Marco Rubio, who I think is going to be the establishment alternative to Jeb Bush, because he has a lot of the same policy prescriptions. He's Hispanic and he's young. And I think and he's from Florida, obviously. And I think there will be a conservative alternative, probably Ted Cruz, who's extremely well-funded and has a lot of grassroots support. Ted Cruz has like $50 million in the bank. And people don't realize how much money Ted Cruz has in the bank. But this is all going to become very clear as people start to drop out. Next few weeks, you're going to see Rand Paul drop out. Mike Huckabee, I think, is probably going to drop out pretty soon. He saw a little bit of a bump. He's gone back down again. I think that Rick Perry will be out, obviously. Lindsey Graham will be out. This field is going to go from 16. I mean, Jim Gilmore doesn't count as a human, so we don't count him. The field is going to go from 16 to about 7 within the next 8 to 12 weeks. The next few debates are going to knock some folks out. And Rand Paul is going to drop out, by the way. Rand will drop out because he's going to be in a competitive Senate race in Kentucky, and he's going to need to focus on his Senate race because he knows at this point he has no shot of being president of the United States.
And if Trump continues on with his popularity and he is the white knight, you've already given 4-1 odds on Hillary's going to take it anyway. What would be Trump's best political running mate to
Oprah. I mean, yes, he said that, right? I mean, he was asked who his best running mate would be, and he said Oprah. Who would Trump's best running mate be? Honestly, he should double down. I mean, if Trump is the nominee, he should pick somebody like a Ben Carson. He shouldn't go with an established politician. He should say, I'm totally anti-establishment all the way, and I'm going to pick somebody completely out of politics. You know, Trump Fiorina, Trump Carson, something like that. We're going to go completely, like Hillary's establishment, I'm going to run completely anti-establishment. And by the way, I think Trump will win a lot of white-collar males. Honestly, the thing that I'm shocked at, and I don't understand why the Republicans are not running on at this point, given all of the factors that I cited earlier, why they are not running on crime is beyond me. Now, crime is such a big issue in this election. I mean, Black Lives Matter is doing such damage to the Democratic Party right now, and the Democratic Party is embracing them wholeheartedly because 30% of the primary base for Democrats is black. And so that means that's why Barack Obama's the president and Hillary Clinton's not. And so Republicans have a real opportunity to talk crime. If Donald Trump came out tomorrow and said, I stand with police, he would immediately jump in the polls a little bit. And there are a lot of people who are moderate who would swing to his side just because the Black Lives Matter movement is so disreputable. I mean, after what just happened in Texas with the shooting of the cop down in Texas, if you missed it, there was a cop in Houston who was executed by a black guy. This follows hard on the 2 reporters being murdered on live television by a guy who was an Obama supporter and cited, racism of the United States as a reason for murdering two white people who worked at a station. And the Black Lives Matter movement's a disaster area for the Democrats. Trump actually could have some blue-collar appeal. And look, he's running competitive with Hillary in Ohio right now. Right now, the Ohio race is 44-42 Hillary over Trump. Now, and by the way, that I think is actually a more durable poll than the ones that show Jeb or Rubio beating Hillary in Ohio, because people know Trump and they're still putting him in range, right? No one knows Jeb except they know his last name, and nobody knows Rubio except maybe the guy who drank from the water bottle at one point, and he's kind of young and good looking. But aside from that, the generic Republican is beating Hillary. But remember, we don't have generic Republican to run. There is no generic Republican, so you sort of have to pick your poison. You have to pick your guy. Trump is making some significant blue-collar inroads, which is the upside of Trump. The downside of Trump is, can people take him seriously? And I think the answer to that is probably no. I think he definitely has a shot at the nomination. I wouldn't have said that a month ago. It's a shocker to me. that's for sure.
So, quick follow-up: you don't think he could coax Kanye 4 years earlier?
Oh well, yeah, Trump West would be an excellent ticket. By the way, if Kanye West ran today in the Democratic primary, he would win. A Kanye Sanders ticket would definitely take the nomination. Seriously, Kanye West is just Barack Obama with no brain. I mean, this is a guy who became well known specifically for saying that George W. Bush was a racist for causing Hurricane Katrina with his flatulence or some such nonsense. Kanye West saying that he wants to run for president is not really a shock. And when people say, well, Trump, this is so terrible for American politics, let's face two realities. One is Barack Obama, the selfie stick president, is the current occupant of the Oval Office. So don't tell me about the honor of the Oval Office being besmirched. Okay, number two, the fact is that most of the people who have been president of the United States have kind of been doofuses. I mean, if you look at every president between Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, with maybe the exception of Quincy Adams and Van Buren, everyone was a doofus, right? And that was okay. See, this is what's so problematic about the country right now. It was okay to have a doofus as the head of state, right? When you had Zachary Taylor as the head of state, what difference did it make? Because the federal government was 5 people. Like when Abraham Lincoln was president, you could literally knock on the door of the White House and see him that day. That's how small the federal government was. There are people who tell accounts of this. So I walked up to the White House, I was in D.C. for the day, I went to the White House, I knocked on the door, and Lincoln said he was busy, could I come back in a couple hours? Right? I mean, today, unless you jump the White House fence and get in, which I guess you can also do, it's a little bit tougher. It used to be clowns without power running the government, and that was fine. Now it's clowns, except they have all the power. Right now we have powerful clowns running the government, and that's what's kind of scary. When people say, do you want to have Donald Trump with his finger on the nuclear button? It's like, well, Barack Obama's got his finger on the Iranian nuclear button, so I don't see how this is a downshift exactly.
Yeah, Ben, you talked about the impact or lack thereof of the Hispanic voter and the white voter. I'm curious to know your opinion of the Jewish voter can have on the next election, and historically, traditionally, how the Jewish voters have supported the Democratic side, and if you think that'll shift over to more Republicans.
Well, I mean, okay, so a couple of things about the Jewish vote. Obviously, the Jewish vote goes disproportionately Democrat because we're talking about ethnic Jews, not observant Jews, right? I mean, the fact that I'm wearing a yarmulke kind of tells you where I stand on that particular debate. I don't think that if you are ethnically Jewish but you have no relationship whatsoever with Judaism, you really count. I think that you're not really a Jew. I think that, any more than somebody who's born into a Christian family and now is an atheist is a Christian. And the fact that you were born Jewish has no relevance to me. But taken as a whole, the Jewish vote votes Democratic. There has been a shift. In 2008, Barack Obama won approximately 78% of the Jewish vote. In 2012, Barack Obama won 65% of the Jewish vote, which is the lowest percentage for any Democrat since I believe Jimmy Carter in 1980. Hillary Clinton, the leftist Jews are going to go back to Hillary Clinton because they will be duped until they're not duped as much, right? The fact that Barack Obama his administration is actively anti-Semitic. I mean, the Iran deal is such a disaster for not only America but for Israel. The fact that the Obama administration is cracking down on religious people of all stripes. I mean, this is why I say that Jews aren't really Jewish, because if they cared about Israel or Judaism, they wouldn't vote Democrat anyway, which is why Orthodox people vote 85-15 Republican. But the reality is that what will make a difference in the election is not the Jewish vote, which is approximately 2% of the vote. What's going to make a difference in the election, and when you're talking percentages of the Jewish vote, now you're talking a percentage of 1% of the vote, right? If you have a 65-35 split, then you're talking about 1.3% of the vote versus 0.6% of the vote. It's like the differences are relatively minute. What will make a difference is where some of the Jewish donors put their money. And a lot of the Jewish donors have been putting their money not into Hillary Clinton, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen on the Republican side. Many of them are not super comfortable with Trump. Jewish Republicans, the people who give money, the Sheldon Adelsons of the world, they tend to be people who are less socially conservative than foreign policy hawks. And so, I think that Hillary Clinton will do fine among Jewish voters. She's going to win about the same percentage as Obama did in 2012. As far as the money, I don't think that she's going to get as overt support from a lot of the Democrat Jewish donors as Democrats have gotten in the past, depending on who Republicans run. If Republicans run somebody who's deeply socially conservative, then I think that Jewish donors will find a way to give money to Hillary Clinton, because the truth is most Jewish donors care more about abortion than Israel, which is pathetic and disgusting. So that's how the Jewish population kind of breaks down.
So if you think the battle's a moral one and it's not an economic one right now, is there somebody, from your experience, that you'd say is part of the Republican Party but not one of the nominees that could potentially stand up morally against, Hillary Clinton or, all of the
The truth is, I think that
victors on the other side?
the question is, are there any non-candidates who have the capacity to step in and really make a difference in this particular debate? I think that Trump has shown the power of celebrity. So if I can think of a celebrity who would be, great at that, then sure. I really like celebrity candidates. Now they've become fun. But I'm trying to think of somebody outside government who would really make a dent in that particular case. I don't know that it matters. Meaning that I think any of the people who are candidates right now can do it. I think anybody could seize that mantle, but they're all scared of making the moral argument. Which, by the way, Democrats are not scared of. Hillary Clinton will routinely say that business people are terrible and awful and no good and very bad. So I think any of the candidates are capable of doing this. I just think that they have to get the cojones to do it, and I think that they have to be willing to throw some punches. So it really is not candidate specific. If you're asking if there's a candidate who's not in the race who I'd love to see in the race or something like that, no. We already have enough candidates. I can't think of anybody who I would be desperate to see. I was a Mike Pence fan until Mike Pence had nothing, the governor of Indiana. I got to tell you, I'm of the Milton Friedman school of thought when it comes to politics. It's not about getting the right guy in, it's about making the wrong guy do the right thing. And so I think that that's something that we should all be putting our focus on right now. It doesn't really matter who the nominees are, we have to find a way to make them do the right thing, whether they're left or they're right. The good news about Hillary Clinton as opposed to Barack Obama is apparently she can be bought. So if we have to resort to an open bribery maybe on the table, maybe we can always send her husband to go speak in Nigeria or something for $650,000 and send her emails that she'll destroy on her server about Nigerian princes in need of money or something. But it's it really is about the message that is articulated, not as much the messenger. There are people who are more capable of giving that message, and people who are less capable. Like Mitt Romney just didn't have it in him to give the message because he's too nice a guy, he's too good a person. In order to be in politics, you really kind of have to be an asshole. That's forgive the language, but that's the truth. Everybody needs to. We want our presidents to have an edge. There hasn't been a president of the United States who doesn't have the capacity for a-holery. Really, certainly not in my lifetime. Everybody has the capacity. George W. Bush had a real edge to him. People think of him as just genial and nice. George could get rough. He got pretty rough with John McCain in 2000. So we need somebody who's willing to get rough. And whoever shows an edge, by the way, if Marco, this is the thing I hope that Marco Rubio does. If Marco Rubio can take off the beta cloak for just a second and show that he's an alpha, he'll actually make a dent in the election. He needs one touch of Trump. Like Trump needs 1,000 coats of Marco Rubio, but Rubio needs one touch of Trump. If he has that one moment where he stands up and he just says something quotable, then he'll be in decent shape for the election. Right now, he's running like a college Republican runs for class secretary.
Who do you think gives the Republicans the best chance to win the election?
Okay, so who gives the Republicans the best chance to win the election? I'm not a big... so I'll do the cop-out and then I'll give my answer. So the cop-out is, I don't like crystal balling it because we were told by everybody that McCain would be the best nominee in 2008. He was the most electable. We were told that Romney would be the most electable in 2012, which he may have been, and there was just no way to beat Obama. That's definitely a possibility. As far as who is most electable, I think you can strike people off the list based on least electable. And there's some candidates we just don't know enough about them yet. So, for example, if Ben Carson turns out to actually do his study, right? If he actually turns out to learn, and if he's not Herman Cain, right, if he actually wants to learn, or Sarah Palin, he actually wants to learn, he actually wants to get ensconced in policy, which he certainly has the capacity to do, then he could be dangerous in a general election, because Ben Carson comes off as plain-spoken and soft-spoken, and against Hillary Clinton, if he dropped a bomb, he wouldn't even have to say it loudly, which is the best kind of power. If you can say something softly, not like Trump, if you can say something softly and have it be a bombshell, that's an extraordinary amount of rhetorical power. So Carson, I think, is an interesting candidate as far as general elections. Rubio, I think, would win Florida. I think he would win Virginia. I think he would win Ohio. I think Rubio is a solid candidate, again, if he shows fire in his belly. And I'm waiting for him to show fire in his belly. So they're all kind of one step away, I guess, is what I'm saying. Like, they can win. Everything sort of has to break right for Republicans in order for them to win. And even Donald Trump could win, theoretically, if he had one iota of self-control. Of course, then he wouldn't be Donald Trump. Right? As soon as he leapt in, I said to people that if the guy had any brain-to-mouth filter at all, I mean, if there was anything in between his brain and his mouth, then he would be president of the United States in a heartbeat, because he's got immediate name recognition. There are certain people I think definitely cannot win, by the way. I think that, sadly to say, I think Carly Fiorina would lose. I think Carly Fiorina would lose because she's seen as Hillary-like except Republican. I think that she'd be fine as VP because she'd be a decent attack dog. I don't think that Carly Fiorina would beat Hillary Clinton. The question isn't who can win, the question is who can beat Hillary, assuming that Hillary's the nominee, and then the math changes if she's not the nominee. Right? Let's say that Obama, who right now is one button push away from finishing Hillary. I mean, you don't want to be Hillary right now. She's got to feel like Charlie Brown trying to kick the football at this point. Right, in 2008, she charges right at that football, and she's going to kick it, and then Barack Obama and the media are right there, and they just take it away like Lucy. And then 2016, she comes along, and she's going to win this thing, and it's handed to her on a silver platter. And there's Barack Obama again, and his FBI is now investigating her on the email stuff. I promise you, Barack Obama is making active phone calls to candidates right now, saying, who wants this? If he could get Deval Patrick in Massachusetts to run, he would do it. If he could get Cory Booker from New Jersey to run, he would do it. He hates the Clintons. He despises the Clintons. And that's the whole wild card in all of this, is that the biggest danger to Hillary Clinton is not Bill's sex life or Hillary's corruption. The biggest danger to Hillary Clinton is Barack Obama, because Obama desperately does not want her to be president. He doesn't want a Republican to be president even more than that, but he really does not like Hillary Clinton. So if it's not Hillary, then the calculus totally changes. Right? If it's Bernie Sanders, for example, then the field opens up as to who could win. Because Bernie Sanders is not going to draw minority support, so his coalition shrinks markedly. If it's somebody like a Deval Patrick, if Cory Booker were to jump in and take the nomination, if Elizabeth Warren were to jump in and take the nomination, then the calculus changes again. Because Elizabeth Warren runs as an anti-establishment candidate, and then the question becomes, okay, how do you paint her? And that's a tough one. Elizabeth Warren would actually be a tough candidate, and I know Elizabeth Warren. I mean, she was a professor of mine at Harvard. She's another word that I shouldn't say out loud. So she's a tough customer. Is how.
Do you think Biden gets in, and if so, does that change the 4-to-1 odds to Hillary?
Yes, he gets in, and yes, it changes the odds. But only if, again, one thing happens. If he gets in, then Obama has dropped the hint he'll endorse in the primaries. If Obama endorses Biden, Hillary has got serious troubles, right? Because Hillary's coalition, right now Biden is winning among young people, and he's winning actually among a lot of white people. And Hillary is drawing the entire minority base right now. If Biden jumps in, and he's blue collar, obviously, and he is much warmer on the stump than she is, and he's quite handsy, and if Barack Obama were to endorse Joe Biden, if he were to say, yeah, Joe's my guy, who's my great vice president, I think that he takes about half of Hillary's support, and the person who then becomes most likely to win the nomination is Bernie Sanders. Right? I don't think that Biden takes enough support away from Hillary and Sanders combined to win the nomination. I think he takes enough support away from Hillary to let Bernie Sanders win Iowa and New Hampshire. Remember, Hillary Clinton was almost out of the race in 2008 after New Hampshire. Right? Until she started weeping in New Hampshire, she was done. Right? She didn't finish first or second in Iowa. She finished third in Iowa in 2008. She finished behind John Edwards in Iowa in 2008. And then in New Hampshire, she pulled the miracle comeback by crying, which shows how far we've come in our politics, that Edmund Muskie back in 1968 ran and cried and lost, and Hillary Clinton ran in 2008 and ran and cried and won. That's how this works now. But I don't think that same trick is going to work twice. So if she loses Iowa and New Hampshire, which is becoming a more and more significant possibility, and Biden and somebody who's not Bernie Sanders wins one of those, she's got a serious problem because her entire support base is in the South right now, and things get really interesting at that point. That's why I'll give 4-1 odds that if she's the nominee, she wins, but I won't give 4-1 odds that she's actually the nominee. I'll give 3-1 odds that she's the nominee.
So if that hypothetical plays out, who's the best Republican you think it runs against, a Sanders or a Biden?
Well, against Biden, this is going to sound funny, but Ted Cruz would be great against Biden just because he would shred him. Like Joe Biden he comes off as very sincere on the stump. Like that's what he does. And we don't need somebody who's going to out-sincere Biden. We need somebody who's going to show him for the dolt that he is. So you need somebody who's going to show him up as unintelligent. That's Biden's vulnerability is that people think he's stupid, right? And then he's not stupid. He's very corrupt, but he's not stupid. Bernie Sanders' vulnerability is that people think he's a wild man. So you need somebody who feels reassuring to people, right? So Rubio feels somewhat reassuring to people. Trump, no. There's some other candidates in the field who feel, I think, more. Ben Carson feels really reassuring to people when he talks. So it's all based on where's the vulnerability of the other candidate and how do you match up with that vulnerability and then exploit it to the hilt.
How real is the possibility that Donald could actually get Mexico to build the wall?
Okay, so first of all, it's such a ridiculous claim. Like could we do it? Sure, we could do it. Of course, we could do it. Right? We're their northern neighbor. We own their economy. There's no reason we couldn't do it. He's right. If we tariffed them, they would build the wall, right? Because they'll do whatever we tell them to do. Because at a certain point, they're going to have to do what we tell them to do. Because if all we did was just cut the remittances, they would have to do that. Right? So yes, we could get them to build a wall. Do we need to get them to build a wall? No, of course not. I mean, the fact is that the federal government wastes more money in one day than it would cost to actually just build the wall. Right? It doesn't cost very much money to build a wall. And by the way, it's hilarious that he talks about the Great Wall of Trump, and we're going to build like these giant stone walls that Huns apparently are going to walk on the parapets of and drop hot oil on people as they try to climb it. But the reality is they don't need to do that, obviously. Israel's wall is not a wall. Israel's wall is a touch fence. Right? It's an electronic touch fence, which is easier to build than a giant stone wall in the middle of the desert. So it wouldn't cost that much money. I think best estimates say it would cost something like $1.6 billion to build the wall. And the fact that there's even resistance from people on this is beyond me. I just don't understand why. Like it's such an obvious thing to do, and yet you have people say, "Oh no, it's unrealistic to do that." Really, so it's realistic to have the federal government take over the health care of 300 million people, but it's unrealistic to build a wall. Right? We built 40-some thousand miles of interstate highway in the United States, but it's unrealistic to build 1,000 miles of wall. And so that's why Trump is resonating. And then on top of it, getting Mexico to build it, it's just funny. I mean, the guy's just funny. I'm sorry, he's just funny. It's like he's amusing. I love covering him because he's going to say crap that people feel like saying, but they know it's ridiculous and crazy, and then he says it, and then they're like, yeah, that sounds great, and then you have actual policy people trying to evaluate whether it's realistic or not, and it's pretty spectacular. The one thing he's doing is he's allowing the media to escape coverage of Hillary, but they would do that anyway. Right? Hillary is her candidacy is actually imploding, but they're able to avoid coverage of it by saying, what crazy thing did Donald Trump say today? I mean, the other day Hillary Clinton literally said that Republicans want to put 11 million people on boxcars. Right? She made a Nazi analogy to deporting millions of illegal immigrants. Okay, as somebody, most of whose extended family was murdered in the Holocaust, this seems mildly offensive to me, but she gets away with that because, of course, she's a member of the halcyon left, so she gets to do whatever she wants. So Trump is sucking all the air out of the room for sure, which is why you're seeing all the other candidates get super frustrated and now they're just trolling and trying to get media attention and all the rest of it.
You mentioned the taking over the institutions, Hollywood, education, mainstream media. With the CNN doing the upcoming debates and their selection process for the candidates, would you comment on that?
Well, the selection process for the candidates was greenlit by the RNC, and this is really up to Reince Priebus, right? CNN said that they were going to use their own standards for the debate, but if the RNC didn't like their standards, the RNC could just pull the debate. So the standard is ridiculous. They set the polling date for the 10 candidates who will be in the big boy debate. They set that standard extending before the last debate, which makes no sense at all. I mean, that was a ground shift in terms of the debate. And before the last debate, Scott Walker was the leader. right? And now Scott Walker is an afterthought. So that standard makes no sense. Carly Fiorina has every right to be upset. She's grown tremendously in the polls. She should be on the stage with the other guys. By the way, I will say this for Carly Fiorina: she will benefit more by not being on the stage with the other guys. She will significantly. She did last time, right? Because she wasn't part of the clown car that was. Right? She wasn't part of the 4-alarm fire signal alert on the I-5 that was the last Republican debate. She was with the little kids, and she looked like she looked like an 8th grader in a kiddie pool. And so when the best thing that could happen to her is that the RNC keeps her out. She gets to say she's anti-establishment, and the establishment hates me so much that they couldn't even allow me on the stage with the other big boys, right? And this is sexism, and that's why they won't allow me on the stage with the other guys. And then, on the next debate, she'll be on the stage with the other guys, and then she won't do as well as she's been doing. I mean, it's a lot easier to go up against noted debater Rick Perry than it is to go up against Donald Trump and his lather of doom and the rest of the Republican candidates, some of whom are actually pretty good at debate. I mean, Ted Cruz is actually a very good debater. I mean, he was a debate champion at Princeton. So that she is benefiting from being the largest fish in a very, very small pond in that other debate. So best thing that could happen for her is for CNN to continue to keep her out of that debate.
But if Donald ends up doing the independent candidate run,
yeah.
You see that's another Ross Perot effect?
Yes, if Donald Trump runs independent, Republicans will certainly lose. I don't think that he's going to run independent, by the way. I think that he's polling too well to run independent, meaning that if he eventually loses, I don't think that he just takes his ball and goes home. I think that he understands that there are enough people who would be upset with him that it wouldn't be worth it for him. And he understands, I think, also that maybe he's fully delusional. I mean, his father's actual middle name is Christ, so it's possible that his father's name was Fred Christ Trump. For people who don't know, so he literally is the son of God, and so it's possible that he is just delusional enough that he thinks that he can take all that support with him if he goes third party. But I don't think so. I don't think he runs third party. By the way, I will say this for Trump. I think he was the only one who answered that question correctly on the stage. Will you vow to support the Republican nominee? I wouldn't. Seriously, I wouldn't. I mean, why would I? I mean, I think every Republican on the state should have raised their hand. Depends who the Republican nominee is. I mean, if they nominate John Kasich, screw it. I'll vote for D's nuts over John Kasich. the idea of party loyalty over principle is the biggest problem with the Republican Party right now. And this is coming from somebody who used to correspond routinely with Mitch McConnell's people and has not done so for months and months because of his incompetence and sellout nature. So, I think that I don't think it'll run third party. I don't. But it depends on the nominee. If it's Jeb Bush, I think everyone will run third party. I think that I will run third party if it's Jeb Bush.
Question, what did you think of the Fox debates on the way they handled it?
Another word I can't say. I thought it was a bleep show. I thought it was an awful debate. I thought that the debate was, it could have been an opportunity for Fox to showcase all of the candidates, which is what the RNC wants. It could have been an opportunity for, okay, here's a question to each one of you that allows you to kind of highlight your strengths, and we'll ask you one tough question that allows you to show how you can fend off your weakness. But instead it turned into, okay, Fox is now going to demonstrate that Fox isn't a right-wing network, Fox is a fair network. And so it became much more about the moderators than it was. I mean, I said this, I tweeted this, that if that debate had taken place on ABC, every Republican rightly would have been very upset with the moderators. And because it took place on Fox News got away with it. I'm sorry, but no one in the world cares about Donald Trump's Twitter account. I mean, it is not a legit question in debate. You're mean to women on Twitter. What do you say to that? Who gives a flying? I mean, seriously, the country is, we're 20 years from extinction. And we're asking about Donald Trump being mean to Rosie O'Donnell on Twitter. This is solid political fodder. I thought the debate was a sideshow, and I thought that's why. And it was such an opportunity for it not to be, because everyone was going to watch specifically because of Trump, and they did watch specifically because of Trump, and then they allowed Trump to take it over. What they really should have done is they should have been tight on the time, and they should have actually gave people an opportunity to. But the first question to Ben Carson was, "Why are you even here?" That question at the end about God was such a cynical, nasty question, particularly for those of us who are believers in God. When they ask, so when was the last time God talked to you, Senator Cruz? That's so obnoxious. And it's so obnoxious. And Cruz gave a good answer, and all the candidates gave a good answer, but it was such a nasty question. I mean, it would be like a moderator saying to Hillary Clinton, "When's the last time Gaia talked to you?" Right? It's so cynical in the way that it's framed. So I hated the debate. I thought it was a terrible debate. I hope that the CNN debate will be better. But the truth is that I would like to see I'd like to see a round robin style debate tournament. I think that'd be a lot more fun. I think that instead of having 10 candidates on that stage who each gets to talk for 30 seconds, I think they should set up a round robin where it's like American Idol. We have all the candidates debate each other, and then we sort of take tallies afterward as to who people thought won and lost, and then we match up the higher ranked people against each other. And I think that the candidates should actually do whistle-stop debates with each other. I mean, I don't care about Chris Christie's opinion on like anything right now. Why do I want to waste 4 minutes on Chris Christie, who's not going to be the nominee? Right? Why do I want to waste? I mean, Lindsey Graham was part of that other debate. Right? Lindsey Graham, his entire base consists of his mother. And what I want to see is like the only part of the Republican debate that was good that anybody actually liked was Chris Christie versus Rand Paul. Like I would actually like to see a 20-minute debate, which you could do, just the two of them going at it on national security. Right? That would actually be really interesting. I would love to see I would love to see Donald Trump go up against Ted Cruz. Right? Cruz, by the way, has been playing it real smart on Trump. He's kind of waiting in the background on Trump, waiting for Trump to stumble and fall. I don't know that it's going to be quite that easy, but by doing that, he's insulated himself from the Trump attack machine, the lashing out in all directions that would normally require a straitjacket, but he's worth $9 billion, so no one has a golden straitjacket available. Cruz is playing smart, but I would like to see them go at it, and I'd like to see Trump actually questioned on, so you say that you're a conservative, so why is it that you made pretty much all of your money off of government-induced wealth? I mean, you confiscated people's property using the government, and then used it to build your hotels, right? This is actually what happened in the Kelo case. So what is it, you know, like these would be questions I'd like to hear asked and answered, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do this whole 10 people on the stage nonsense, and we'll get to hear from each of them 30 seconds, and that'll be most people's main exposure to the candidates.
Just a follow-up question to the number of GOP candidates. The left has really enjoyed snickering at the right because of the number of candidates. Do you feel like that's possibly a strategic misstep now that Hillary hasn't quite gotten away from the emails and the FBI, and now they're admitting that maybe she's not the right candidate would be such a scary indictment that they really have to support her?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate inside the Democratic Party over the DNC and how they're handling this, right? Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders came out and slammed the DNC for not having to. I mean, their first debate is December 19th. You know why they picked December 19th, by the way? Because the new Star Wars film comes out December 18th, which means that nobody in the world is going to watch this debate. No one, right? Everybody is going to be in line for the new Star Wars flick. So they have this debate, and no one's going to watch it, and the other candidates are ticked off about it. I do think that it's bad for the Democratic Party they don't have more candidates. I mean, aside from the formidable Lincoln Chafee and his metric system, they have a real dearth of candidates out there, and that's a problem because this is an election where people don't want to feel like the president was anointed. I mean, we already have a king; we don't need a second one. So yeah, I think it's a misstep. I think it's a misstep by the Democratic Party. I think that people are feeling like Hillary is not being exposed to enough fire from her own side, and that's why the Bernie Sanders surge. I mean, Bernie Sanders is such a non-entity. And he's such a nothing, and yet he's being treated as the light bringer from the socialist skies. And it is amazing. It is amazing. I mean, he had a rally legitimately hijacked by the Black Lives Matter crowd. Right? I mean, they literally walked up onto his rally stage and took over a rally from him, and he sat there and did nothing. Right? That's why I think Donald Trump would beat Bernie Sanders. Actually, I mean, maybe physically, but actually he would beat Bernie Sanders. Right, Jorge Ramos tries to take over a press conference, and Donald Trump deports him, and then you know, Bernie Sanders gets hijacked by Black Lives Matter. In his next rally, he hires a Black Lives Matter spokesperson to lead off the next rally, which he actually did in Los Angeles. The next person who led it off was a Black Lives Matter spokesperson. So he's weak for sure. But yeah, the original question, yes, Hillary being the anointed one does not help the Democrats, just like. The establishment tried to anoint Jeb, and that didn't work out well for them. I mean, Jeb is, like I said, I think Jeb's done. Jeb's down at 5% in the polls. He's down, in Iowa, he's finishing 7th currently in Iowa. In New Hampshire, he has now dropped behind John Kasich. Right, he's now running 4th to 5th in New Hampshire. He's done. He's done. He's running third in Florida. Right? It's Trump, Rubio, Bush in Florida right now. It's a pretty stunning indictment of the Bush family. Well, that's it then. I'll either tell jokes or I'll get off the stage.
Right, thank you, Ben, for your no-spin perspective on issues that not only affect businesses in this room, but the economy of our nation and of the globe. So we appreciate your introspection there. We're going to take a break, and if we could all be back in the room at 1:45, we'll get the panel discussion started. And Ben has graciously accepted a spot on the panel, so more questions for him to follow. Thank you.